So tonight we're going to go over the June CDH Metagame report. This is a report that Mr. Squirrelmob here produces every month from user-submitted game data. He does a write-up on Reddit, and we're here to discuss it a little bit. So James, why don't you take it away, boss?
Yeah, so like Timmy was saying, the CDH Metagame project is just a, at this point, year-and-a-half long labor of love, just taking games that people submit by a survey on Google Forms and breaking down some of the data from that. It's not perfect, it's got some flaws, but it's an interesting way to look at things that covers more than just how often something is winning. Because if you look at stuff like game reporting bots on different Discord servers, they've probably got more information in terms of like just who's won games, in terms of raw number of games played, than I do. But this survey gets into some other stuff like how long the game took, what the seeding order was, things like that.
Yep.
So with this this month's report, we had right around 80 games submitted, which is a little lower than it has been historically, but it's kind of leveled out from the past couple months. So while it's low, it's not, it's not falling still, which is nice. A lot of continuation of the trends we've been seeing across the project. Player one seems to have an advantage going first. We see that the games are taking, on average, between 3 and 6 turns seems to be like where the bulk of the games are ending. Somewhere in the neighborhood of like 50 to 60% of the games are ending in that range. And that's kind of been happening since...
Because after turn 6, it just drops off.
It really
like hardcore drops off.
Yep. Which is interesting, because like the way I measure it is like turn 10 is turn 10 plus everything after turn 10, which in theory is like an endless sea of possibilities. But there are fewer games that end on from turn 10 on than games that end on turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, and turn 6. All of those turns individually have higher rates of games ending that have been submitted than everything that's taking 10 turns or more. Yeah, kind of reinforces like the speed of the format.
Right, like overall. And when I was looking at it, you said there was about 80 games submitted this month. And I mean, you have a decent amount of historical data, like we've kind of touched on in the past couple of months. I mean, I think you got
this current version of the survey is about 770 games or so. The previous version, I think, hit 1,000 before it got reset. And the first version, which was from January of 2020 until Flash got banned in April, I think had 500 or 600 games over a few months.
One was a little more short-lived.
Yeah.
Because of Flash.
Yeah, big changes.
So, yeah.
Turns out Flash was a big change.
it is a big change. Yeah. So, and then it looks like most of the games are getting submitted by the person who won the pod.
Yep.
And it's looking like the person who wins the pod is favored being player one. Relatively significantly, actually.
Yeah. So if we think about like a baseline in a 4-player game, we would expect everybody to win around 25%, give or take. Player one seems to be winning at roughly 10 percentage points higher than we would expect to see.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, they're winning somewhere in the neighborhood of 35% of the games that have been submitted are being won by player one, which is a lot. Now I'm realizing I didn't include visual for this month, so...
I'm like, where is it? It's usually here.
Yeah, it's not there. But it's 35. It's what 36.19% in this update. So if we think about 25 as the baseline, we give or take 5 percentage points based on just variance and other stuff. that's still 6 percentage points above the top end of that range we would want to see.
Yeah, I mean, and that's an edge just by where you're sitting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the other trend that I was actually kind of looking at was that while after turn 6 the amount of like game ending just drops, it really peaks on turn 3 and it peaks on turn 4, and then into 5. So like,
yeah,
but like turn 3, 4, and 5 all have about the same percentage.
Yep. Turn 4 and turn 5 actually have exactly the same number of submissions as of this update,
which is like 17% and 18%, or 16.5% and 17.5%. But if you think about it, if the person who's reporting is the winner, the winner is slightly disproportionate to the person who's in seat 1, and the turns are turns 3, 4, and 5 for the predominant amount of wins. That means that a higher than average percentage of the time you have player 1 winning on turn 3, 4, and 5. But what that means is that if it's on turn 3 and they're the first player in the pod, that's everybody else's turn 2 still. Like as far as like deployment and setup is concerned.
Exactly, which is where that benefit for player 1 comes from. I'm actually going to do, when this version of the survey wraps up, and I don't know when that will be, because version 1 wrapped up when Flash was banned. That was a nice, clean place to change.
Yeah.
Version 2 wrapped up when Commander Legends became legal, because that was also a big sea change in what was available and what was possible. We haven't really had any big shifts like that recently.
No.
Maybe something will get banned. Maybe there'll be something crazy in one of these sets coming out in the next couple months. But at some point, I'll probably just reset it anyways and get a 4th version out. And whenever I do that, I'm going to do like a post-mortem on version 3 that goes through some of the things like how often did player 1 win on each of these turns, sort of thing.
Yeah, I just thought that was kind of interesting because I mean, I remember one time I think when we first talked about it, that peak really started to happen on turn 2. And it has been kind of slowly trending over the past 3 to 4 months of actually getting later and later and later each month, at least with the data that's submitted to you.
And it's kind of it's changed kind of in 2 ways. It's really coalesced around that turn 3, 4, 5, and 6. It was already kind of focused there, but now it's much more like very heavily centered on those are the turns that are definitely having more games submitted on that end on those turns. Whereas before there was a bit more variance. Which could be due to small sample size. It could be due to who's submitting the games. Like that's part of the problem. It's not perfect. There's a lot of variables in it that aren't necessarily all.
We're not claiming. We're just going off of what gets submitted, and if people want to make a difference on it, submit.
Yeah, that's really the only way.
The more people submit, the better, more accurate the data is at the end of the day. And really to be honest, 80 games in a month is roughly the equivalent to like a 24-person or 32-person FNM would generate as far as pods were concerned.
Yeah, I mean that's effectively
maybe a couple of weeks worth actually. Yeah,
and I mean if we think about like how many games get played across the different CDH servers each week, I mean we're talking about this is not a huge proportion of them. But it's some.
No, but I mean it's not insignificant. I mean, at 80 games, that's 320 players worth of pods being played over the course of a month. Yeah, and I mean that's a pretty reasonable size event. Like even if it was an 8-round event, that's still
it's definitely like if we consider this like one LGS, it's like a month's worth of FNMs basically.
Yeah. I mean, roughly, like it's like one one localized meta's worth of data, essentially. I mean, which isn't bad.
Yeah, and it's coming from all
kinda,
over the place. So
yeah, I mean, it's a little spotty, but just it gives a nice little snapshot. I just found it kind of intriguing that the actual pacing compared to the previous months is starting to kind of go longer. That means that the meta, despite the emphasis on turbo noise, is that the games are actually starting to slow down a little bit, at least as far as like what's being submitted.
Mm-hmm. And I think if we look at what decks were submitted this time around, this overwhelming like spike in Timna Thrasios mid-range is probably what's helping contribute to that. Because it jumped from like the 9th played deck to the 5th.
Yeah, I think it was like 7-5 or something like that. But yeah, and a number of decks that are kind of like the faster ones, like Elsha isn't necessarily the fastest, but only had a few games submitted this time. Blue Farm only had a few games submitted. Whereas TNT Midrange and Urza Polytyrant and Gitrog, which even though it's a fast deck, it's not, the fastest deck.
Right.
They kind of like led the charge in submissions for the last month.
Yeah. Well, I know a couple of guys have been testing out. I did a live brew with Richie and Mike from Founders Club, and a couple of guys have been testing out this. It's a Shimmer Scepter Thrasios brew that we did. They've kind of picked it up and kind of carried it along, and I know at least some amount of games they've been reporting on that, and that's a TNT list, Thrasios Timna list. So I did drop the report in chat. If anybody's interested in giving it a look-see, please feel free. Are there any other highlights that we wanted to go over on this while we were kind of on the topic?
I don't know if there's a good way to quantify this, but it'd be interesting to know if the reason that player one has so much of the advantage is more so contributed by the mana advantage from being able to play their lands first, or from the card advantage of being able to draw. Because, I mean, typically in 60 card 1v1, if you go first, you don't draw. But I don't know if there's also a good way to do that in Commander, because if the first person doesn't draw, well, then the second person draws, and it's kind of like, does the advantage shift to that person and the other two still lose out?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question that I don't think is particularly easy to answer, because I think it's probably a slightly different answer depending on like what each deck at the table is, right? Because some decks are going to care more about having the mana, some decks are going to care more about having the card. Really, it's probably the combination of both. I've seen some different ideas that like, how could we mitigate this? But that's not even a Commander problem. That's a Magic multiplayer rules problem.
Right. Well, and I mean, I don't know if getting one extra card is necessarily a huge deal, but when you couple that with the fact that they're untapping before everybody else, and especially when that spike hits on turn 3, that means player 1 has gone land ramp, maybe done something else, land ramp, maybe something else, maybe wheel, untap, they're either jamming the dockside and doing stuff, or they're doing something at somebody's end step before their turn 4, or maybe they're on turn 2 doing something at end step before their turn 3 while everybody's kind of tight on interaction. You know what I'm saying?
So and it really snowballs very quickly with like, if somebody has to mulligan down to 5 or 6, that is going to be even harder to come back from. If I was in charge of things, I would maybe add something in there to like, after people mulligan, if you're not going first, you can scry 1 X times, where X is the number of people going before you. So first player doesn't get to do it, second player gets to scry 1, third player gets to scry 1 2 times, and the fourth player gets to scry 1 3 times before anybody does anything else. But I don't know that would solve the problem either.
Well, I don't know if it would necessarily not, but what it would do is help give an advantage. Like, help kind of even things out. It helps smooth the draw a little bit, so that way the players in preceding turn order kind of have a better idea of what's coming up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll mitigate it or what. I mean, that's one of those knobs that's like you can tweak it a little bit, and then you can tweak it a lot a bit, and results can vary. But that's also the other thing. The other thing with multiplayer, right?
Yeah. And if we look at like some of the ways that like Mulligan stuff has been tweaked in the past, like it has resulted in very different things. Like, remember when partial Paris was the Mulligan rule for Commander? Oh my lord!
I remember those days.
Those were dark times.
I liked it, but I mean, I did broken stuff, so I'm not arguing.
I bet Ashani loved it. Partial Paris to the perfect Narset hands.
Yeah, to the perfect frog / Narset hands, probably. So, all right. I think
one thing I think would be interesting to look at, if you want to scroll down a little bit to the second graph that's a little bit below. Yeah, next one. So this one, what this graph shows is the win rate for each player on every given turn, taking how much they won on that turn divided by that player's total number of wins. And the thing that strikes me as interesting about this is that what it shows is that for the most part, the players are all roughly, not perfectly, but roughly following the same trajectory in terms of how well they are performing on any given turn. And so what that says to me, looking at this, is that there is clearly a player one advantage that isn't necessarily strictly tied to the earliest turns, but maybe is tied to something else.
I mean, because there's to develop more.
Right, exactly. Because you can see, player one is this blue line that has this nice kind of curve up and then kind of dips down and almost looks like an elephant or something.
Right.
The others all follow a similar path. Now, they don't peak quite as high.
I was going to say, player 3 peaks on turn 3 above everybody. But that's because
that's an interesting thing that I want to say Cam from the Lab Maniacs asked about in May or in April, one of the earlier reports. And so I looked into it a little bit more, and the best guess we had was that it was some level of mana or card gating that player was able to overcome on that turn for whatever reason. So,
I mean, you know what's better than playing the dock side? Playing the second dock side.
Right. Dock side's an answer. It's also possible that in some of the games, because I looked at some of the submissions for like win conditions, and a couple of them were like the Witherbloom Apprentice Chain of Smog combo. So it's like, okay, did somebody else try going off and then they were able to swoop in when there wasn't as much interaction? That's a possibility.
That is a possibility. Like, so what I've kind of noticed in my games is that there's like generally around turn 3, there tends to be a wheel that goes online, and then it kind of puts one person like into the nuts, and then kind of everybody else is kind of floundering around, and any type of sculpting that would happen kind of gets put by the wayside in that process.
Yeah, wheels are strong. Turns out.
Yep. All right.
I don't think they're a problem, mind you. But they are.
All right, Sheldon.
I like Sheldon. I respect
Did he really
what he
say
does.
that?
He's a super interesting guy. I disagree with that assessment. But that's okay. That's okay. We're allowed to disagree on things.
We are.
So I also don't suspect that anything's going to come of that, and people read into it really uncharitably. Like,
people there's like one to read thing into things.
If there's one thing I could ask the CEDH community to not do anymore, it would be to not take the worst reading of everything Sheldon ever says, because
he's everybody.
Yeah, he's just a person, just saying stuff. Like, sometimes he says stuff that maybe we disagree with, but that doesn't mean we got to tear him apart.
I mean, yeah. There was that article he wrote. That was a little circle the wagony though.
Yeah, that was a couple years ago. I'm not.
No. It was the one he wrote like last week or 2 weeks ago.
Oh, the one 2 weeks ago. That's a prime example of this, right? So he mentions, people coming in from other formats, potentially not, getting EDH or whatever, which is his opinion. He's entitled to it, and there are reasons why it may or may not be 100% accurate. That doesn't mean we need to
put him on blast.
Yeah,
I mean, I did feel compelled to write a response to that.
Sure.
But my response was mostly kind of feels like you're blaming CDH players for the fact that
see that
Magic
that was very different from my takeaway from it. My takeaway from it was that it largely landed squarely at the feet of Wizards themselves for not taking care of other formats very well, which they have not done.
No, they haven't. But so it was this back tone, this tone that's kind of going on, because I've had a couple other interactions with some people on Twitter and just from the casual community, the casual EDH community, where they're I like playing fun decks. Man.
It is certainly not all on us. There is certainly a disconnect
and I'm
from the belief that competitive and fun somehow, to some people, they believe that they are
mutually exclusive,
which they are not. Right? I have fun in almost every CEDH game I play, and I almost only play CEDH nowadays.
Right? Yeah.
Because Wizards has gutted basically every other format. But yeah, I was really glad to see him come out and put those posts on Reddit, on the EDH subreddit, the CEDH subreddit, looking for more feedback and information.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think people miss when they put on the blinders.
Yeah.
And they miss, not necessarily that he's coming and talking, but I've been playing EDH for a reasonably long amount of time relative to the format. And the way that tone has shifted has been, even if it's not, perfect or anything like that. Again, he's a person. One of my pieces of feedback to him was that sometimes I feel like his articles have too much crammed into them. And it would help him to edit them down a little bit. But that's just my opinion. Yeah, that's just my opinion.
Right.
But even if the tone's not perfect or whatever, people are going to complain about, it's still very different than where it was 2 years ago.
It is
5 years ago.
It I don't know. It came across to me as pretty finger waggy. That one in particular.
I don't know that I felt that way, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, just especially with some of the other interactions I had, from other people that are known personalities.
No, there are, and somebody brought this up, and I don't remember where. I think it might have been Chef Nathan on Twitter brought up the fact that there are some people who really have built a name on the back of that animosity towards CEDH players, and they are still given some level of respect and some level of esteem in the community at large, which
based on that
really exacerbates these problems.
Well,
there's a couple people who need to be told to sit down and shut up.
Right, and those people also tend to associate with the RC.
Right. And I don't put that entirely at the feet of the RC, but I think
it's not their fault. But what it is,
I think there are things they are unaware of.
They're unaware of, or just don't have a strong enough opinion on, or just whatever.
Sure, yeah,
it could be a combination of. I mean, there's plenty of things that I don't, that I'm aware of, but I'm just nah.
Yeah, who cares, right?
Right. But at the end of the day, just that whole so when I read the article and then based on those interactions, it kind of was like some of that old timey, like, you better watch, you know, just kind of like warning of the perils of trying to win and optimize, and I am being a little hyperbolic in how I'm phrasing it, of course, but just kind of like, sort of like when people used to, you know, when the automobile first came around, and all the horse and buggy companies were like, watch out, or like when AC electricity came out, like when there was something new that was kind of world changing, you know, whatever the old technology was kind of like, careful, it's dangerous, and they're fucking frying horses and shit, you know.
I do think the one thing that I have a hope that will be more embraced than it has been to this point is that the idealized vision of what the RC wants Commander to be, which is what it was for a very long time, is not the reality for a number of players. Now, I'm not going to say the majority, because I don't know or think that it is. I think the majority of players probably play still the way, you know, sitting with buddies at the kitchen table or whatever, but we don't know that for sure. Yeah. But a lot of people play in LGSs. A lot of people have arms races in their groups.
Yeah.
A lot of people, you know, have things that lead to these problems, and as it currently stands, there's not great guidance on that.
There isn't, because of the overarching like ideology of that, like, we should keep it casual, we should keep it. And it's like, I can guarantee you, as the guy who literally people just line up and ask them for help optimizing lists all day long. I mean, you guys see it more than most. Like, how many times do you think I get asked personally for help in a day? What, 4 or 5 times on average? That's just what you see. That's not the DMs. That's not other social media sources or people who just know me. Like, and almost unequivocally, it's casual players that are having some type of power disparity in their group, and they're wanting help to close that gap. You can go back and look at EDH Rec, for example, and you can just pick commanders. You can pick some that are CDH commanders and some that aren't. And if you look at those like average lists and what cards are seen in those commanders, like, players are still casual, but at the end of the day, Magic is a sum total 0 game where only one person wins, and players want to win. Like, that's why you play it. Like, sure, you might have more, I don't want to quite use the term hang up or self-imposed restrictions involved in getting there, but you do want to win. And there always comes a certain point where, like, if somebody's beating you all the time, like, you get tired of it and you want to do something about it.
Yeah. Like, it would be great if we could teach people to be okay with losing, but that's a very hard lesson to learn, right? It's a very difficult thing for people to wrap their heads around.
I mean, and even if you are okay with losing, like, there comes a point where you get tired of it.
I want to know more. I guess it's understandable. I want to know more about, like, how the RC pre-pandemic, right? Because the pandemic's obviously thrown everything to the wind in terms of this. But, like,
yeah,
back in the day, Sheldon used to write articles about, like, what he was experiencing at the local game shop he was going and playing at every now and then.
Yeah.
Like, I want to know more about that. I want to know what is the actual background that the RC is coming from, and how similar or different is that from other people's? Because I think finding those differences and recognizing those differences is the first and biggest step to bridging any gaps that there might be.
Yeah.
Right, because you don't know what you don't know.
Right, you don't know what you don't know, and I mean, my meta and those metas are all different, and even if it is a meta, and I do know one thing that happens a lot, like, especially, and this is something that I see, is people get they have a pet deck or a couple of pet decks, and they get a new idea and they really want to make it work, but like really want to make it work. And I mean, really want to make it work. And they will progressively take steps to power that list up and power that deck up because they want to make it work. And while that's not CDH, that is optimization. Optimization happens regardless of on what level it is. Whether it's imposed by budget, imposed by a theme, imposed by Vorthos, by color, by something, Magic players will still min-max. Like, that's just what we do. And to actively campaign against that seems antiquated at best, especially when pretty much any online resource you can see and get says to the contrary. Like, sure, there's still fun decks, but I'll guarantee you they're playing good cards, and at some point they tune those lists. Now, that doesn't mean you got to go all the way to what CH does, but there is a scale between, you know, out of the box precon and I'm playing 99 mountains and an elemental and turbo Nas.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a very fair point. I mean, even if you're building around, you know, some interesting or weird niche thing, like you have your +1/+1 counters deck. Like, how many people, the first thing they're going to think of when they're building their +1/+1 counters deck is, oh, I need a doubling season
and a hardening scales.
That happens for a reason.
That's optimization.
Mm-hmm. So
even if it's on theme.
I think in that article that Sheldon wrote a couple weeks ago, that he mentions the idea of I forget exactly what he calls it, but basically like the shrinking of time of a game, which I think is a different thing from optimization, and I think conflating them is a problem. Because if we are looking for games to be a safe haven for people to kind of do their goofy stuff and, you know, do it over a certain amount of time, like, look at the numbers I've got for CEDH. That ain't happening here, right?
Right.
What's happening here is the game's coming to an end pretty damn fast.
Right.
But if you want to have that, like, build up, like, that's a valid concern.
It is.
But that isn't necessarily the thing that, like, optimization can lead to that, but I think
it doesn't have to.
Right, exactly. It doesn't have to. Right.
Well,
you can optimize within those constraints.
I think if maybe, but again, I mean, like, I get so many questions a week of just like people. I want to win. I'm tired of this guy. I literally, what's the best deck to annoy a mono blue player? Like, is literally, I got that question 3 times this week, and it's like, don't play with him. If he's that much of an asshole, quit playing with him. Well, I want to make him hate life.
Being willing to walk away from a game is a skill that people need.
I'm just like, yo, dog, chill. Like, or just go play Jund if you want to annoy him. Because you just out-Jund him. But, like, that's the answer he wanted, but that's not the real answer that I gave him first.
Mm-hmm.
But
no,
I think it's
you
more
don't have to play it with anybody else, right? You're
like,
sitting down for a game of EDH is entering into a very short-term relationship with 3 other people. If it's not consensual, then you need to not do it. It's that easy, right? If they're doing something that you're not cool with, use your safety word, which is no, and walk away.
Oh, don't even get me people who use Rule 0 as a way to metagame. I had another guy, he said that, so they were not allowed to play, like, the guy who hosts their group wanted them to keep powering down, did not want, like, stacks and rule of laws and, like, I don't know, a bunch of stuff like that. Turns out, first thing he does once the no rule of law thing goes into effect is start jamming a bunch of extra turn spells.
Rule 0 is incredibly useful, but if someone's going to use it to be a jerk, then it's not serving its role in that particular group.
I personally would be much more interested if those types of articles were more about, like, here are some suggested ways to maybe be more responsible. This whole, like, anti-optimization movement that I've been kind of seeing happening from certain personalities. If it was more of a like, here's how to do things kind of a little more responsibly, like, you know, you need to have a certain amount of, you don't need to, but there a certain amount of interaction and things like that are good, and you want to have them, but that, you know, you don't need to go to the extreme, but like maybe some ways to like do it a little more friendly, a little more casually, a little less diehard, I guess is another way to put it. Like, I think that would be a big boon to the community if somebody with a platform could start like having some type of dialogue about that. I mean, that's one of personally, that's one of my big missions is, I mean, we call it CDH and we call it budget, but really at the end of the day, it's more about like just trying to help provide resources and like the ability to learn how to kind of build better decks that kind of do what you want, but like do it without having to buy $3,000 dual lands and whatnot. You know what I'm saying?
It's one of those things that's on the edge of like, what level do we say this is a format that a large attraction of it is that you can do anything, versus how do you establish with your group what it is that you want to get out of a game. And like that's the trick, because people want to be able to do their thing, and anything's possible in EDH, right, which is great, but people don't want to talk about like, how do we get to that place that's mutually beneficial for everybody.
Right. Well, and how do we set realistic expectations of like how, like having that, like, I mean, because I mean, every CDH game has 4 people who sit down and 3 that lose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, almost every EDH game, like at the end of the day, right?
I mean, that's really what I meant. I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
Yeah, no, you're fine. And that's the thing. Like, even when you look at like board games, like if we think about like EDH as a board game, or right, as some collaborative thing like Dungeons and Dragons, or whatever else, there are always things that happen that make people feel more or less satisfied with outcomes in those situations.
Right, but a lot of those co-op games aren't sum zero.
That's also true. Yeah. Like,
that's the problem. Like, Magic at the end of the day is one person wins. There's really no mechanism other than playing on a team that allows for multiple players to simultaneously win, and it actually be multiple players simultaneously win. Like, it's, I mean, people don't really play against like the horde decks, or, I mean, there's like the horde decks and stuff like that, but like Commander is zero sum. Most versions of Magic are zero sum. It's just I'm very interested in kind of like seeing if there's maybe a way to kind of just get that dialogue out there and get it going, just so that way, like, I don't think as somebody who plays spiky games, like, I don't think spiky games are for everybody. I definitely think that CDH is a good release valve for players who drift that way. Otherwise, they just start ruining other people's playgroups. But how to get everybody that's kind of in the middle somewhere to just do it in a way. I mean, how do you get a bunch of antisocial nerds with they can barely pay attention to social cues as it is, to have like an adult conversation about like, and then even as soon as that conversation's over, did it really stick?
Mm-hmm. I think there's also an issue along those lines, which is, I think a lot of people don't know what they want out of an EDH game. I think a lot of people know what they don't want, which is fine. It's a starting point, but it's less important than knowing what it is that you actually want. Mm-hmm. Right? The reason I play CEDH is because I want to do powerful things with lots of interaction and not have to spend, hours to see it happen.
And I want my my opponents to be punching on the same card.
Right, exactly. So, I want it to be, Mike Tyson versus George Foreman, Rumble in the Jungle, throwing haymakers all day. Like, that's what I want to see.
Yeah, for real. Like, legit, man. What about you, Cricket? Do you know what you want out of a game?
What do I want out of the game? No, I don't know what I ever want out of anything in life. Let's be real.
Okay, fair enough.
But I think where all of this really does start is I think we as players need to just learn to let go of the toxicity, both intentional and unintentional toxicity, right? Because when people read certain articles and they get all up in arms and they start shouting to the mountaintops about this is bad, screw this, forget him, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But there's also that other side, and you still see these stories almost daily of pub stompers out at LGSs. And it's like, that gives us a bad name no matter how much we disassociate ourselves from them. And I think that right there is what drives so many people into that anti-optimization bandwagon, right? Is being punched in the face repeatedly by people who are disrespecting Rule Zero and disrespecting who we are as CDH players.
But like, here's the thing though, like, oftentimes, like, and when I see that kind of behavior in the wild, or somebody comes in and then they're showing me what the decks they're playing against are, the problem deck isn't a CDH deck. What it is like a $5,000 casual deck that's just like it's got Mana Crypt, it's got Force of Will, it's got Cradle, it's just got a 4-card 14 mana win con, and then got Consult jammed in it too for some reason. You know what I mean?
I think we also see daily is that people don't always know what CEDH is. They see Mana Crypt and they think, oh yeah, that's CEDH. Doesn't matter what the rest of the deck has in it or what it does.
It can be
felt. It has a Mana Crypt. It's CEDH.
And it's really like an extension of kind of the problem where CDH is the name that we've got now, but it's not really the best name. Like,
yeah,
that leads to this problem because realistically, like, we're not competitive most of the time. Like, yeah, Timmy and I are participating in the MLC, but like that's not necessarily competitive per se. I'm still having fun. I'm out there and like I read these YouTube comments on Ian's games, and people are like, "Oh, Ian's just out there politicking and scumbagging." It's like, shut up. Ian's having a good time. We're having a good time playing with Ian. He's our buddy.
I mean, I'm gonna call him on it, but it's not he's doing anything wrong. I know when he's bullshitting.
Yeah, right. And like at the end of the day, we're all
Ian.
people
I know when you're bullshitting.
We're all people who enjoy, playing this game and enjoy playing with each other. And to get back to Cricket's point about letting go of the toxicity, like this is a trick we use when talking with, setting expectations at the beginning of the school year with students, is wording expectations in a way that is a active, positive thing, right? So instead of saying, don't run in the halls, we would say, walk in the halls. Or walk where it's appropriate or whatever. And I think a lot of online discourse, not just in EDH or CDH, right? A lot of it is, this is bad, this sucks, this is...
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I like this about this, or I like this more and here's why. Like, if we can collectively focus on those little nuggets of the things that we enjoy, instead of, and that's why I think it's important to know what you want out of a game.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point.
What you don't want.
So Jay Ryan in chat actually brings up a good kind of talking point that ties into this, is that he says that he feels that a lot of lower power games end up in these like massive wars of attrition or arms races where nobody can really swing or anything wins. And then no one who has a non-combat win con can kind of get out of it. So then that kind of breeds that type of... I mean, even as far as back as some of my first commander decks, like that was like the first thing I had in my head. I'm like, I manually kill people with 120 damage. I'm
Mhm.
like, I can't even really do it with 33 either, or 63 by dealing combat damage. Like, I need some type of like I win.
Right, and I mean, if we look at the ban list for EDH, there's even sort of a tacit recognition of that problem in that Coalition Victory is banned, right? Like, Coalition Victory being banned is a historical marker at this point. Like, to be fair, I don't think it should be unbanned. I don't think it adds anything to the format, but Coalition Victory...
Yep.
Yeah, Coalition Victory very much... Sway of the Stars is bullshit that wastes everybody's time. That's why it's... Coalition Victory, though, is like a holdover from the old like Grand Melee style multiplayer events.
Yeah, where there's like 9 players. I hate those.
Yeah,
games.
and you can't win that even if they're at 20 life. That's still 180 damage.
I mean, you can, but like you're just like... I played a
press.
no,
exactly.
You just have to hard lock them.
Right. And to get to Jay Ryan's point, and sort of, I think, Timmy, you were going in this direction too, or to address the point, I think that issue leads to some of the optimization choices that people make, right?
Right.
Because if you don't know, and this is going to go back to my other point, if you don't know what you want out of a game, and your games are always resulting in the same thing, and that might be isn't what you want, so it's always resulting in just these long, drawn-out, who has the best value engine type games, which happens a lot in kind of that mid-ish range.
Like non-interactive pods.
Right.
Well, board-centric interactive pods. Like,
yeah, and you're gonna wind up, if that's not the thing that sparks joy for you, that's going to be something you're going to want to change about that. And there's lots of ways to do that. Yeah. The most effective way is by, talking to your group, but that is usually
you don't mean alternate Elspeth? You don't mean alternate Elspeth with the 4-drop Elspeth with a Nevril's disc on board?
I mean, that does it too, but...
That was the Tim Handy answer.
I played Rebel Arc loops. That's what I did.
Oh no, I just ticked up Elspeth and made a bunch of 1/1s and then made all my artifacts indestructible and then
Turns
just
out
blew up everything with a disc.
Altar of Dementia kills people.
It does, but that also makes people salty because they play for 4 hours and then you hard lock them.
It do indeed. Have I ever told you the game of the story of the longest EDH game I ever played?
Is it still going on now?
It could have been. I'm pretty sure we clocked in at least 6.5, maybe 7 hours. It was back when Shahrazad was legal. So, yeah.
That's that a long game.
Yep.
Yeah.
There was when we did the meetup in Grand Rapids, there was a 4-way Nivmir. I played 6 games in the amount of time it took that game to happen.
Yeah. I mean,
I was playing Bloodpod.
Right? That's the equivalent of the end scene of Reservoir Dogs where everybody's standing there pointing the gun at each other.
Kinda. Whoever draws first. It's just one Niv up. It's bad. And they're all playing Twister. They kept resetting all their libraries. Oh God, what is wrong with you guys? But yeah.
That's a war of attrition right there. I'm not going to lose this game, so I'm going to do everything in my power. And it just ends up in a drawn out.
But and I do see that a lot in and I mean that's even one of the things, like the whole combo win is one of the things that I've always seen kind of, while not always directly talked about, it's just you got to have something there somewhere. And there's definitely a power level in Commander or in EDH where you definitely have combos in there, kind of, sort of, but they're not you don't have a bunch of ways to get them. Mm-hmm. And it's once people start digging into how do I get these more effectively And then their buddy starts doing that. And then the other buddy starts doing that. And then the other buddy starts doing that. And it's all because somebody got... instead of that play group just like, you know what, dude? We're tired of 4-hour games. Like, can we just, like, build better decks? Or build... Not better. Better is a bad choice of words. Can we build more optimized lists? Or can we build more streamlined lists? Those are probably better vernacular for that. Can we build more streamlined lists? Like I understand you don't have a lot of money, or maybe we don't play with proxies or whatever. Like, but there is ways to do that. I mean, Source of Plowshares is $2.
Yeah, and I mean, if your table wants to play those big slugfests that take 6 hours to resolve, more power to you. That's fine.
That's fine.
But it's when you have people who feel like they're forced into those positions, that's where it becomes a problem.
Right. Well, and when people like are just tired of it, and they got friends, or maybe I don't know where the disparage comes from necessarily. I just know the anecdotal evidence that I have is that there's always this disparage between the top end of the play group and the bottom end of the play group, and this end wanting to close that gap, and then this end keeps raising it, and at no point do they just say, I'm almost convinced that it's just gonna be an internal problem because at no point do you, so for like in 1v1 it's me versus you. If you screw up, I capitalize on it. It's not the dude over here who capitalizes on it necessarily. You know what I mean? In 1v1, if my deck is better than yours, or not better, more streamlined, more optimized, more well positioned in the meta than yours, I will win. It doesn't necessarily open the floodgates for somebody over there to win. You know what I mean? That very sum zero plays out one way or the other. And if you're somebody who's constantly losing, you don't have anything to blame other than yourself. Either you didn't build your deck correctly, you didn't play correctly, you didn't do these things. Whereas in multiplayer, you have a lot of additional variables that not only affect it, but that you can also just throw the blame on too. And some amount of both happens. I know I've done both.
I think that there is a tendency among some players, and again, this is just based on things that I have seen people talk about online, and experienced in local play groups, but for the most part I play with a pretty insulated group at this point. But there's a tendency for people to say, oh, I don't really care about winning, but then losing is a problem.
They don't care about winning, but they do care about losing.
Right. And you can't really have it both ways, right? And you got to be able to find, because the thing is, like we were saying a little while ago, the baseline is you're going to lose 75% of the games you play in EDH if things are roughly even. Yeah. Like, it'll be different. You'll have hot streaks. You'll have cold streaks. You will have days that you can't.
Your deck
is
better than other people's.
Yeah, you'll have days where nobody else can buy a break.
Yeah.
But if you're used to playing Magic in a 1v1 environment where you probably are good, lifetime for roughly winning 50%. Not in any given event necessarily. Some events you might win 70% of the game. Some events you might win, a game.
Right.
But if you're coming with that viewpoint, it's very easy to get lost in just how much losing happens in EDH.
It happens a lot.
I think there's a really important lesson, not necessarily a lesson, but a really important mindset to get into, which is, how do I find enjoyment in the games that I don't win? Right? So for me, CDH is the answer to that, because almost all the time, however the game is won, whatever's happening, if I'm playing a deck that is suitable for the table, I will feel like I have done something. Or somebody just has the nuts, and that's cool.
Well, but even then, like, everybody's on the same page. Like, that's one of the that's what exactly what drew me into CDH was I got tired of this that dance of like that deck's too strong, but it's not really. It's just too strong in a way you don't like or whatever. Just that power level discrepancy. And you know the mono black player not liking counter spells, and the mono blue player not liking aggro decks, like, and then you're like sitting in it. It was like it felt like every game I sat down at, like 3 people would walk away mad, almost all the time. And that's not to say that was exactly what happened, because this was definitely more of an online phenomenon. And then that was kind of what pushed me more into CDH, because it was everybody kind of was playing with the same like mentality. And I get it. And like, I have a group of guys that I play with locally here. Like, I don't know, they're dads, so like we play like once a year or once every 18 months, like at most. And the last time we got together, I was like, okay, well, can we just all hard cap our budgets at 500? Like, I don't care what you build. Just $500, no more. Because I've tried playing budget decks against them, and they all have those like $3,000-$4,000 casual decks, and I'm like, well, 10% of the time I just, and then the other 90% of the time I just dirtle around, right? Or we all build budget lists, and then I win 12 games straight because I play CDH and I know all the tricks, and they don't, because they don't play Magic like nearly like I do. And we got together, we played, and I was playing Kirk Thrasios, and of course the guy playing Gruul got mad because I had a counter spell, and I'm like, dude, play Destiny Spinner. He didn't know the card existed. I'm like, I named off like 4 cards he could have played that would have blanked every counter spell in my deck. It's like, just didn't bother.
Yeah. I think there's going to be... I think there is a large number of people who play Magic and play Commander that way, where it's like, these are the cards I have, I'm going to slap them together and see what I get. And that's totally fine.
That's fine.
That's totally fine. That is a great way to play if it works for you and the people you... I think that there has to be more recognition that way doesn't necessarily work for everybody. And
I don't think it works very much for anybody.
I'm not going to necessarily go out there, because the thing is that most people who play that way, right, we don't know anything about them. We know that they exist. Like,
I mean, the players that I play against that are like that, at least when they play with me, they don't have fun. And that's fine. I've even tried to be like, you guys sure you want me to come? Because, you know, so-and-so's like literally mad every game I play because I interact with him, and he doesn't want anybody to interact with him, but he wants to cast an Eldrazi.
I think the thing is that we have to realize what works for some people isn't going to work for everybody else, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that if you want to be like, if you want to just have one group you consistently play with and they all agree on something, that's great. That's fine.
Yeah.
Cool. If you want to be part of the larger community, there has to be
the resource collections. Sorry.
No, it's all good.
Jay, did you see Jay Ryan's comment in chat? Yeah. It's just the old slap my collection together deck. And that's kind of how it is, but it's like, it's not like he doesn't know, like, even like if he didn't know Destiny Spinner existed, he knows that Pyroblast exists. He knows Red Elemental Blast exists, and he has them in his binder. Motherfucker knows Lightning Bolt is a card, and it's in red.
Yeah.
He's got a playset of beta ones. He just didn't put it in his list because he took it out for a goddamn Eldrazi. That's literally what he did. He took out removal for a 12 drop. And I looked at his deck.
Sometimes you want to ask the questions and not have the answers. Some people want to do
just
that.
Just don't be salty when somebody answers your question.
True. I think as I was saying, I think that the thing is, if people are insulated and within their own groups and whatever they want to do,
are.
Right? Once you branch out into the larger community, I think there's a tendency for people to believe that their way is the only way and is the best way, and that's a mindset we've got to lose. Some CDH players have that mindset; they've got to lose. Some casual players have that mindset; they've got to lose. Some people with very large platforms have that mindset, and they've got to lose it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so like for me, like I'm a big proponent of not playing in casual tournaments. Like even if there's prizes on the line and an entry fee, I'm not like I don't think I as a CDH player should play in those events. Not because there's not prizes on the line and not because there's not an entry fee, because there's a very high chance that I'm just gonna like I'm not trying to say I'm the best player ever. Like, let me just put that out there because I'm not. I'm slightly above average at best. If there's a commander tournament with an emphasis on casual commander or non-CDH as the tournament, I think that it is bad representation of CDH community if I showed up with a deck and just started stomping folks, collecting them, collecting those prizes. And I think it's even further poor form to be like, well, there's prizes on the line. I'm like, but what fun is that?
Yeah. We had a league at the LGS I used to go to where we had a few players who had higher power decks, and we would randomize the pods to make sure that those of us with the higher power decks were always kind of together.
That's
sometimes
fun. That's
didn't
great.
work out. Yeah, sometimes they were truly randomized or whatever, or people would be like, hey, I want to, jam with the big dogs or, what have you. So we would, try to play decks that were more suited to what was going on. The idea, that idea you bring up that people will say, oh, there's prizes on the line, and so I'm going to give my best. For what? You're paying $5 to win 3 booster packs?
Even if it's $25 for like real cards.
Yeah, Commander for prizes is very, 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 very difficult to figure out. And I don't know that it is a thing that is solvable, to be honest. But
I don't think it is, but
yeah.
Well, no, because what you run into is either these ridiculous ban lists where they say, you lose a point for comboing off this many turns. You can't play this long list of cards. Like, if you win first, you get minus points for that, or you get bonus points. Like, it just becomes this complicated system when you're trying to level the field.
Well, but even then, everybody just games what happens is that just breeds a new meta, and everybody games that, and then you just have to keep getting these, they keep slapping more rules on till.
And that's my point, is you get these, never ending.
Oh, we actually have some questions in chat. Oh, that's a good. So how do you determine what is too powerful? Honestly, man, there's not really a way to do it. It's just, are you a casual player or are you a CDH player? And it's not that the two can't coexist. It's just, if you're going to use CDH deck building principles, CDH play principles in a non-CDH environment, even if there are prizes on the line, sure, you win the prizes, but what's the sport in that? I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, there's really, it is hard to kind of figure it out because there's not, a strict, hard hierarchy of, this is where things lie. People have tried to make power level scales and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It's just.
It's just as bad as somebody showing up to a CDH tournament with a non-CDH deck.
Yeah, and the thing is, you just, at a certain point, you have to realize, when you are stepping over the line, and it's got to be a self-reflective thing sometimes.
It does. it's just, I don't know, like that's just for me, like personally. I mean, and you know, banning all tutors is like, I've heard those suggested. I've heard that they're, you know, and Devontae, I'm assuming, or Jacoby is pointing out that like there's decks that like there's always like a way around it, and you can always kind of squint your eye, like turn your head and squint your eye and kind of needle your way through the, you know, thread the needle just to kind of get through it. And like, I just personally, at the end of the day, I just find it unsporting. Like,
yeah,
I just think that, I mean, unless I'm going to show up and just play a random person's deck, and even then I'm like, well, first thing I want to do is cut 5 cards and put in like slim interaction, basically. I mean, limiting it to a budget helps, which is actually one of the things that me and Richie are talking about maybe doing, is like a $500 like basically a tournament or an event, kind of structured similar to like the Oktoberfest, and like the Marchesa stuff, where it's like the fluid round model and you cut. We haven't quite.
But even then, like, you can have a wide discrepancy between like
you can, yeah.
Like, let's say it's a $200 budget. All right, so $200, I can show up with a precon with a slightly better mana base, or I can show up with a Yisan deck that's pretty functional. Like,
yeah,
that's
you know, or
a
it's
far cry between those two things.
Yeah, well, it is.
I think what's ultimately the biggest disparity is skill and what you were saying earlier, Timmy, deck building principles. If I make a casual deck where none of the lands come in tapped, it's not saying I have duels or shocks in there, but it's still a competitive mindset to deck building in a casual, trying to apply that to a casual table. So
yeah, it's not something you can turn off, to be honest.
Right, exactly.
Like, I saw somebody reference the play pattern of land, cultivate as kind of like a baseline. And I think that that's an interesting baseline to consider. Like, in your games is land turn 1, land turn 2, land cultivate turn 3. Is that considered something that's too powerful for your pod, on par with your pod's power, or low compared to your pod, or like really low compared to your pod? Because that's sort of like a really kind of easy baseline to think about.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's the thing is like
I mean, obviously there's variants with like Soul Ring and shit, but like,
yeah. Well, I mean, Springleaf Drum can be considered too strong. Like, you know, I mean, like you said, I'm like, if you use my mana base template, like you're gonna probably have a pretty reasonably powerful deck. Like, just because there are most of the conditions for those lands to come into play on tap, so you can play your spells on curve, are pretty reasonable most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. And like, I do like the idea of doing like a hard budget. Like, at least that way it caps it without just putting all these random ass arbitrary rules in place. Is like a way to swear ladies looking left. Right. You know, like it's like kind of a way to, it doesn't completely eliminate it, but it affords everybody an opportunity to take it serious, but not so serious that, I don't know, you know, it's just an idea. But I mean, to be honest, I don't like it whenever I hear of commander tournaments or commander events with prizes at like stores in my area, I'm just like, I'm not going. I might show up to like say hi, but I'm not going to play in it, because
the worst things are when like the prizing structure is like set up to handle like a competitive event. Like, there can be commander events where like the prizing structure is incredibly flat. Like, you pay a $5 entry, everybody gets a booster pack just for showing up, and if you win a pod, you get one more booster pack or something like that.
Right.
You know,
like, yeah.
That's a very different than everybody's paying $10 at the door, and the winner of the entire event gets a
mana crypt or a box. Yeah. Well,
That's
I call that. I mean, that's fucking chum in the water is what it is, and
that's asking for trouble.
It is, and I'm not saying it's solely on the CDH player to like not play in events. I mean, again, like, if you're chumming the water, the shucks are gonna show up, like, regardless if they're playing Roger Silas or Nekuzar, like, they still going. You know, you put food in the water, they're gonna come. Like, that's just gonna happen, and like that's the other thing. Like, maybe shops and TOs need to realize that, like, stop, like, because it sends a message. It's like,
this actually gets back to what we were talking about way back at the beginning with that article by Sheldon, where he was talking about, you know, some different things, and somebody, I think it was Cobblepot, but I think I also saw Joking, who, for those of you who don't know, Joking 101 is the guy who heads Marchesa events. That's fine, I can talk for a while. But they both said something along the lines of some guidance for store owners and TOs would be useful. Now, in the RC Discord, there's been some pushback to that from the couple RC members who have commented on it, which usually is Sheldon comments the most, and then Toby, and then I don't know that Scott or Gavin have said more than a dozen words in any one channel in that server, so, you know, it's kind of a crapshoot trying to figure out what they think. But in terms of that, like, I do think that it's important that we have some level of very base level guidance. Like, even if it's something along the lines of, the RC thinks that this is a really bad idea, but if you are going to go through with a bad idea anyways, here's some things that do and don't work. Like, simple, to the point, let people sink or swim. But looking at, like, so Jay Ryan is asked in chat, you know, do most tournaments run Braga style, or is it like round robin? So there's really, in terms of commander tournaments, if we're looking at, like, I'm going to look at CDH stuff, because I think if we're talking traditional commander, normally it's going to be like people playing a pod or two a night. It might be a league structure. But if we're looking at, like, tournaments, there's, like, the time twisted tournaments, and there have been the Marchesa tournaments, and that's basically it. And time twisted runs on a sort of bracketed Swiss style, whereas the Marchesa tournaments do something that's really interesting, where they have what they call fluid rounds. So they have a set time limit. During that time limit, you can play as many or as few pods as you want.
Which I really like, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting way to solve the problem. And at the end of the time limit, the top X number of people, they've done 13, so it's the top person gets a bye to the final, and then you have 3 semifinals, and then you have the final 4. But however they run it, you know, whatever's fine. That's a way to run it. The thing is, multiplayer Magic simultaneously is super interesting when it gets to events and tournaments, but also is super problematic when it comes to events and tournaments, because there's just so many things that, like, happen in the multiplayer game that don't make any sense if we're trying to have any sense of competitive integrity. So it's really a difficult line to tread. The give a pack to a player you think added the most to the game, I've seen that used before for payouts. Here's why I don't like it. It encourages collusion. It encourages, you know, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It encourages like this thing that happened back in 2008, going into the old man vault here, where I played I played some EDH events at Gen Con, and there was a group of players at Gen Con who took advantage of the rules they had, which was basically, you know, if you win the game, second place also moves on, right? Which isn't exactly the same as, like, you give your pack to somebody else, but it's a similar enough thing where they took that structure that was in place and completely rigged it for themselves.
So, I remember a Gen Con where there was multiplayer pods. There were casual multiplayer pods. 3 tickets for a win, but you got 1 ticket for participating, or some amount of tickets. So the way to game the system was you played 4 copies of every pact, and the ideal was simply to play a pact as fast as you could. So that way you would die to the upkeep trigger. You would collect your tickets so you could queue to the next game. So you could grind the prize wall faster, because whatever was way up at the top of the prize wall was better, because sitting there and playing a multiplayer game to win to get 1 or 2 more extra tickets wasn't worth it, when you could just play a pack and then counter it and then have 2 pack triggers and win. You know what I mean? And collect your 1 or 2 tickets and move on. Yeah.
So 2 good questions in chat here that are kind of related. Not to what we're talking about, but to a separate idea that are related to each other. 1, how would you feel if the RC straight up said no more RL cards? Straight up, I would consider creating a Splinter format. Because here's the thing about EDH. To me, it represents the ability to play damn near whatever, right? That is a huge draw for me. When I build... Not that I've made that many low power EDH decks, but when I build a low power EDH deck, I want it to be able to do whatever. I don't want to have to sift through a list of 485 cards or whatever the heck the reserve list is and realize that oh no, I can't play, I can't play this particular weird, I can't play Wall of Kelp anymore because it's on the reserve list. There's people worry about the reserve list, and rightfully so, because the prices for it suck. That's a thing that sucks, and it's why, encouraging the use of playtest cards is a good thing. But on the flip side, the cards that really, really suck on the reserve list price-wise are mostly the dual lands, Cradle, Power, Mox Diamond, a handful of other things. And then most of the rest of it is artificially high because it's on the reserve list. But the cards kind of blow. They're not very good.
But even then, I have built and tested several, 4 or 5 different decks that I've started out at 500 and worked them all the way up till they almost had every card in them. Well, every card was non-reserve list, but they did not have every applicable card that was, they didn't run Imperial Seal.
Yeah.
But even if you did ban the reserve list, you still have cards like Mana Vault that's on $80. You still have Mana Crypt that's 140 or 120. Force of Will that's 100. Mana Drain is 100. Shocks and fetches, these IRL, these non-RL lists I made were $1,000 to $3,000 still. Once you added in all of the all the bells and whistles to make it punch reasonably hard. The Tim Down Crom list I made without reserve list cards was 2,700, because you ran Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Chrome Mox, you ran Ancient Tomb, you ran Jeweled Lotus, you ran, Demonic Tutor, Diabolic Intent, and it's it just added up.
And I think the further along in time we get, what we're starting to see now is the number of format warping cards that are on the reserve list is being dwarfed by the number of format warping cards that aren't. I mean, we've got Dockside, we've got Jeweled Lotus, we've got Underworld Breach. These are not reserve list cards, and these are more problematic than something like Time Twister.
Yeah. And to go on to the next part of this question, so there's a couple of these that actually tie together. So Reflecting Pool, I think it's Jacoby. I think he said it earlier, it's Jacoby.
Yeah, I think he did.
Said, as mentioned about why the ban list is centered around a casual format, which I want to get to in a sec. But I want to jump really quick to Jay Ryan down here mentioned the Power 9 joining every relevant EDH deck they could, but most of them aren't particularly broken. Yes, but also no. So this gets back into kind of some history of the format, which I am very slowly trying to actually make a thing out of this, but the Power 9 cards that are banned, not Time Twister, were banned not because of necessarily power issues or anything else, but because of this old criteria they don't use anymore called perceived barrier to entry. Basically, they didn't want EDH to look like Vintage, which is a totally fair and fine thing. People see Sol Ring on a table, they think, oh, cool, Sol Ring. They see Black Lotus on a table, they think, oh, crap, I can't afford that. Now, here's the thing about all of those cards, though. Think about how good Lion's Eye Diamond is. Black Lotus is just better. Think about how good 4 and 5 color decks are already. Moxen just make them better. Time Walk, good God.
Can you imagine
Ancestral
Edric
Recall
with Time Walk?
Yeah. Like, Ancestral Recall is, like, fair-ish in EDH, but, like, would be a problem, because there's no reason not to run it, right? And, like, that's why Lutri is banned. There's no reason not to run it if you're in blue-red. And so that's, all of them were banned for a particular reason, which doesn't exist anymore, but all of them are very bannable for other reasons.
And at the time, the formation of Commander, cards like Sol Ring, Mana Crypt, Mox Diamond, Chrome Mox, Mana Vault, they were, LED used to be $12 when Commander first came into existence. Chrome Mox, you could buy them for $6.
Yeah,
at that time.
There's been massive price inflation. Mana Crypt was like $30 maybe, and was one of the more expensive things.
Yeah. I remember the first time I looked, like, I had a box of Sol Rings, and I was like, gonna build a Commander deck, but I didn't have a Sol Ring on me. And I was like, oh, I'll just go pick one up. There's hundreds of them because everybody pulled one in their revised starter deck that they bought 25 of, and then hated Sol Ring because it didn't cast their Crawl Worm fast enough. $17. I was like, luckily it got reprinted in the ground, but it's still $3 to $5.
Right?
Given the time of the year.
Looking at the ban list as a whole, though, I see this a lot, especially from CDH players, but also from some casual players, where they think that either there shouldn't be a ban list or that it should not be based on casual traditional EDH play. And I disagree with that, and here's why. The things that make EDH at all levels compelling, to me, and this is just my personal opinion, the things that make it compelling and as open-ended as it is, because realistically, like, EDH is this big umbrella that covers many different smaller groups underneath it. The things that make that possible are because the ban list is so minuscule compared to what
the size of it.
The size of it is, yeah. And if we think about, like, all right, let's say we make bans based on competitive things. No more Mana Crypt, no more Sol Ring, no more Mana Vault, no more LED, no more Underworld Breach, no more Mox Diamond, no more Adnos, no more Oracle, Consultation Pact. The list goes on. The list grows, triples overnight, and that format sucks in my mind. There are some people who really enjoy that kind of stuff. Like, if you want that experience, Conquest is a well put together format that does that.
And it is
not
built,
what I want.
It is built from the ground up to be balanced for competitive play. And as much as I love Wedge and Shaper and all the guys that curate that format, every time I go to try to build a deck, I'm just like, and it's not a bad format. Like, I've looked at the list, they look fine. It's just every time I
it's just not what you want to do, and it's just not what I want to do.
And they're basically they're all like, they're not entirely identical, but they're very on par with, like, the budget list that I host.
See, that's the thing, Jacoby. I think that if we said we want a competitive ban list, I think it would be pretty deep.
Deep.
I think that realistically, if there was a competitively balanced ban list in CDH or in EDH, it would easily be triple the size of the ban list now. Maybe not triple, but at least double. And the opposite is also true. If we were to ban everything that casually was deemed to be inappropriate, the ban list would be much, much longer.
Well, and a lot of the problem exists between CDH and non-CDH. because really like casuals, again, it's not like a adequate vernacular for it. I don't
more
know
traditional EDH.
Yeah,
That's
non CDH. There's like this gap that as people kind of start to power up, or there's a power disparity, and they try to like catch up to it, and they start bumping up to that gap, and that's where that issue kind of arises, where the cards that are good there on one side of the gap are not equal to the cards that are unfair on the other side of the gap. Like when I play budget, Dockside's not a lot of times it's not nearly as good as it is in CD. When I play Dockside in casual, like when I take my budget CDH decks and I play them in mixed power pods, a lot of times they're not that great, but then other times I play against a guy playing Karn or a guy playing 1313. Why am I drawing a blank? Emrakul. And I'm hard cast on a Razaketh on turn 2. And it's very wishy-washy, or very like splashy one way or the other. It's like real hot or cold, and it's not very consistent. But a lot of times when I'm playing lower power levels, I tend to want to build more dorks into my list than rocks because of the efficiency. And it's only when I run into these really overpowered casual decks that my CDH cards really start to shine, because I'm able to make 14 mana on turn 3 or whatever. But then I'm unopposed at that point.
Mm-hmm. And there's like a whole like subclass of cards that fit specifically in that zone where you start bopping into, you know, what is no longer traditional and what is competitive. So you might run into like Armageddon and Ravages of War there. Like nobody really plays Armageddon in CDH. Like there's like one or two lists that use it, but it's also like a card that people absolutely abhor in more traditional power levels.
Right. It's like Social Contract pushes it out in the format, like in the area of the format where it's more effective, and then it's just not played where it would be considered like acceptable, due to the fact that like nobody fucking does anything with more than 2 lands anyway, so who gives a shit? Like after turn 1, I don't care if I got lands. Like you know what I mean?
Like Lavinia runs it, I think, but Lavinia also like breaks parity on it by herself. So
yeah, but even then, like, it I don't know. I've always found it to underperform, and it does. Like you start getting into those like into that pub stomp zone, or like just that like budgetless casual, and then they're playing against less powerful decks based on price tag, in those kind of instances, and then that's when my CDH decks are like. You know, because I'm playing against all the same bells or whistles, just not the same optimization, not the same streamlining. Then the guy who's really behind, because he's not playing all the power stuff, really gets upset. And honestly, I switch decks after that happens. Like I just ask to play one of their decks, because I'm not trying to just hard cast a Razaketh on my second untap.
And I think we run into another problem trying to curate the ban list a little bit more. Actually, we have 2 distinct problems. One is a lack of data. We don't have tournaments that WotC is watching or that the RC is watching that are telling us what are the prevalent combos that are dominating the format. I mean, we have an idea of what they are, but if you ban those, then it just moves on to the next one. And the next one, and the next one. It takes our format far longer to discover what those are and what's dominating the format than something like Modern, where they have, you know, their top 8s and their GPs and, you know, like worldwide watch tournaments where you see these decks perform.
Think about like how Wizards has handled competitive ban lists in the past. Like they will ban the best thing, and then they will also ban 2 or 3 other things that they believe will be the next best thing. The equivalent in EDH would have been like, all right, we're banning Flash, but we're also going to ban Thassa's Oracle, and also going to ban War Jace, and also going to ban Labman, and also going to ban Isochron Scepter. Just for good measure to make sure that all of that's...
Keep Jace and Labman out, because they were never a problem before, and they banned Scepter, and then they banned...
See, that's the thing. I think if we had a truly competitive ban list, like competitively oriented, I do think that those cards would see the axe. And
they probably would. I was just saying, like, initially.
Yeah. But like, it'd be very much a like ban the next best thing sort of mindset. Yeah, and like the thing is, when Flash was banned, like people were just figuring out Underworld Breach. Underworld Breach now is one of the best things people can be doing. So if you wind up going in a competitive mindset and banning the next best thing and the next best thing, like Cricket was saying, it takes so long to figure out what the next best thing really is that we wind up with this whole like power level disparity because we've cut the legs off from things that we think are going to be good, but it turns out this thing's just better.
Well, and then you start running into the fact of like what happens when you... So let's say you ban, like, we'll just even do this as a hypothetical just because it's on this conversation. Let's say you ban Oracle, Labman, Jace, Breach, Scepter. Those seem to be kind of the... Then you start running into, you get like Evolution is somewhat unaffected because it still has like Dockside and Emil.
Najeela's
still basically fine. It just doesn't have the console backup plan, so it just plays extra untappers. You get like a lot of these commander-centric decks like Kinnan that just run on the Basalt Monolith train and get big fatties. You get Chulane. Like, you start getting these very like niche commander-centric decks that their win cons are so narrow until you just push everything else out, and that's what you're left with. Like Godo and Morrowind and Solvala, like a lot of those pieces don't translate to other things, so you're not like... And then when you ban the pieces that fit in like 5 or 6, 10 decks, then those start creeping up and they just start becoming the best thing. And then it's like, okay, well now are we banning Hammer, like Helm of the Host? Are we banning Shrieking Drake? Are we banning Basalt Monolith? Because they become problems? I mean...
Yeah. Because it's a Pandora's box. Because really, like, Flash was clear and obviously, like, a problem in that it was so much better than everything else. And that's not even why it was banned. It was banned because it created just abysmal playstates.
Because it ruined everybody's fun. That's actually why it got banned. It wasn't because it was broken. The RC's answer to that was just don't play it. But then everybody was like, well, kind of just sucks all the joy out of it because that's what we should be playing.
Like, I literally know people who left the game because of Flash. Like, it sucks.
Yeah, there would be an artificial evolution of a ban list twin based on like what was unbanned, but people would start with all the obvious stuff that was untouched and then kind of move it from there. At least whenever I've seen like formats develop and whenever I've seen like shakeups happen. Yeah. Because like I've been playing Magic since the dark. Like,
yeah. And there's also this thing where in competitive formats, like 60 card formats, we see bans be focused on enablers, but in EDH, bans are largely focused on some of, not even all of, but some of the payoffs. And that creates, to me, a much more dynamic and interesting format because it allows for everything from unchanged precons to the tippy top of CDH to exist and all be doing their thing.
What's up, Cricket?
Did Cricket have a second point he was going to make earlier? Because we kind of jumped into his first
jumped in on you, man?
No. Well, those were the 2 points. Is there's not enough data, and then it just becomes this revolving door of, okay, now these next 3 win cons need to be banned because that's all anybody is playing. And now these next 3 win cons need to be banned because that's all everyone is playing. Because people are always going to play the most efficient win cons at the time. And it's once you get further and further away from the most efficient, then that's when you see those fringe decks come into the forefront.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing to keep in mind, like, you can go on EDH Rec, which is, I know I quote this a lot, but I've been kind of poking around on EDH Rec, like, ever since its inception, and you can watch the casual list get more and more and more and more and more streamlined as all of these cards like Dockside and Deflecting SWAT and stuff like that, or as the format expands, it's gonna it's just gonna homogenize by nature of just the game itself. Hey Josh, how you doing, man? We're just bullshitting, talking about stuff, you know, what we do.
Yeah. Another issue with a competitive ban list is that as more things would get banned, because they would, you start to see a problem where we already kind of have this problem where the format sort of has, in some ways, conglomerized around 3 or 4 color soup. Although that got better with Commander Legends. Like, there's more 3 color things now than just 4 color soup. But you start banning a lot of win cons, and suddenly 4 color soup and 5 color soup become all that's viable. And that, to me, sucks.
It does. So now that we've beat,
you also like Godo and Urza and whatnot too. But like, if your answer is this deck with a specific, very niche win con versus playing all the good stuff in all the colors, like, cool, nice format.
Yeah. Hey, if you want a good Mardu deck, talk to Jacoby Ryan. He's got a good one for you. So I think we've kind of covered this topic pretty extensively.